All right, continue our study of 1 Kings. I think we left off last time in 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 20. Continuing on, I tell you what, I don't know if you're like me, but I read through this and I thought, oh my goodness, when is the bad news going to end? This is a lot of squalor, a lot of turmoil. In fact, I was thinking that what we need to write up on the board about what's going on in the life of Israel at this point in time. I mean, it's total chaos, it's total turmoil. But you know, I thought about it, and the frightening thing, the sobering thing about what's going on in Israel is, you know, not so much different from what's going on in America today.
That's what I was going to say. Just go ahead and change the stretch out Israel.
Yeah. And you think about, you know, the nation of Israel, the children of Israel as a group were God's chosen people. He had a divine purpose for them, obviously, just like He has a divine purpose for all of us. You know, He grew them into a huge nation, millions of people. They wound up in slavery, as we all know, for 400 years in Egypt. Came the appropriate time, God says, I'm going to deliver my people from slavery. He brought them miraculously out of slavery, brought them into the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey, the place where He wanted them to be. They were all, for a short period of time, one united people, and then all of a sudden they become divided. And I think about the northern kingdom of Israel that lasted for about how long? Lasted from about 931 BC to about 722 BC, about 200 years. You know, I thought about America. How old are we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not quite 250.
Yeah, not quite 250. And I tell you what, the trajectory of our moral condition is not going up, it's going down, and it's going down fast, and it's frightening to see how far and how fast we're going down. I mean, you turn on the news just about every night, and there's something on there you think that, wow, could this possibly be happening in America? And of course it could. You know, I think God raised up America based upon a principle that we are one nation under God, and that is a principle that made America was great because America was good. America was a God-fearing, God-honoring country, and I think God protected us in miraculous ways. But you got to wonder how long God is going to continue to protect us when we continue to turn our back on Him and His Word. You know,
See, that's
if God will allow these things to happen to His own chosen people, His nation of Israel, civil war, the turmoil, the chaos that they went through, I mean, we're not exempt.
See, that's what they used against our forefathers and all, that they said that, you know, that they came over here and killed the local people and, you know, and religion, destroyed them, and, you know, they don't see God working. That, you know, just like here,
Yeah.
when God is working, He doesn't care who it is. If it's His will, it's done.
Yeah.
You know, and they use it against us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just saw on Facebook, Columbia, they just killed another pastor down there.
Mm.
He was standing in front of his house, and they said that they're, you know, having a big war down there because they don't like Christians because they're destroying their cocaine and stuff like that, because they said that they've changed a lot of young people's ideas and stuff, and they don't want that.
Wow. Going on everywhere. Okay, well, all right, we're going to pick up in chapter 14, verse 21, and the bad news continues. We get a little bit of ray of sunshine over in chapter 17 when Elijah comes on the scene, so just hold your breath until we get there. What'd you start saying?
Forgot to say, today's Kenny's birthday.
Who?
Kenny?
Kenny, happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday.
All right.
Happy birthday.
All right, good day, good day.
3/4 of a century.
Is that 3/4
of a century.
Time marches on. Yes, yeah.
Just a number, Kenny.
Yeah. Just a number, that's all. Okay, chapter 14, verse 21. Remember last time at the end of chapter 14, we laid Jeroboam to rest. We're going to hear some more about him, because remember the prophecy Up in chapter 14, verse 11 says, anyone belonging to Jeroboam who dies in the city, the dogs will eat. And he who dies in the field, the birds of the heavens will eat, for the Lord has spoken it. So pretty harsh condemnation on the house of Jeroboam. We haven't seen that prophecy fulfilled, but we're going to see that in chapter 15 fulfilled. Okay, so at the end here we see in verse 17 and 18 says, all Israel, let's see, verse 19, and the rest of the acts of Jeroboam, how he made war and how he reigned, behold, they are written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Israel. And now the time that Jeroboam reigned was 22 years, and he slept with his fathers, meaning he died. And then Nadab, his son, reigned in his place. Okay, so we'll pick up there. Lon, would you start reading for us in chapter 14, verse 21?
Rehoboam, son of Solomon, was king in Judah. He was 41 years old when he became king, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem. The city of the Lord had chosen out of all the tribes of Israel in which to put his name. His mother's name was Naomi. She was an Amorite.
All right, pause right there. That's kind of significant there. Now, as these chapters read, we switch back and forth. It's almost like switching channels, right? We're going sometimes from the north to the south. So where are we now with Rehoboam?
South.
Okay, we're in the south, and Rehoboam is the son of Solomon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it says that his mother was who?
Naamah,
Yeah, Naamah, and she was an Ammonite. Okay,
Yeah.
so what does that tell us?
that she was a Gentile.
She was what?
She was not Jewish.
That's right. So what we see here is that Rehoboam is the product of an illicit relationship insofar as God is concerned, because God prohibited Israelites, particularly kings, from marrying outside of the nation. But he did that and produced Rehoboam.
It just goes back to what he told them when they went in, you know.
That's right.
All that is coming back to haunt them now when they didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, exactly right. Verse 22, read on.
Judah did evil in the eyes of the Lord. By the sins they committed, they stirred up his jealous anger more than those who were before them had done. They also set up for themselves high places, sacred stones and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. There were even male shrine prostitutes in the land. The people engaged in all the despicable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites.
Pause right there. Now this is going on where? This is going on
In the temple?
in the temple area, in the very place where God has established his presence. These people are doing these awful things. These, the sodomites is what they're referred to in the King James Version. Homosexuality is rampant. They're building altars to these foreign gods on the hills. I mean, just really a slap in the face to God in the very city where he established his presence. All right, read on, 25.
In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, attacked Jerusalem. He carried off the treasures of the temple of the Lord and the treasures of the royal palace. He took everything, including all the gold shields Solomon had made.
Pause right there. That's a lot of what Lon just read there in verse 26. That phrase, he took everything. You know, remember we read about all of the wealth that Solomon had built up? I mean, it was just unimaginable wealth that was accumulated. And so here comes the king of Egypt, and what does he take? He takes everything. He takes all the wealth away. I mean, just going like that. And it's interesting, he says that even all the shields of gold which Solomon had made were taken away. What is symbolic about the shields of gold? What is that a metaphor for? Remember
It has to do with the power of God.
Exactly. God's presence is often portrayed with gold, these golden articles in the temple. And what's the purpose of a shield? Protection, right. So when the golden shield is taken away, what does that symbolize?
God's gone.
Yes, the protection of God has been taken away from them. And so, even worse than the loss of all of the treasure, to say here that the protection of God has been taken away. I mean, that's a big thing.
Wait, is this going back to when Solomon showed everything that he had amassed? This isn't connected with that?
No,
Okay.
That wasn't Solomon.
no, it's not.
No, that Who did that?
Hezekiah did.
Oh, okay.
At the time of Isaiah.
They've been looted quite a bit through the years.
Yeah, I get it mixed up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no shortage of stupidity among the kings of, of these nations. Okay, verse 27, read on.
So King Rehoboam made bronze shields to replace them and assigned these to the commanders of the guard on duty at the entrance to the royal palace.
All right, pause right there. The symbolism of a bronze, of a shield made of bronze it's basically substituting man's protection for God's protection, which is never as good. All right, read on.
Whenever the king went to the Lord's temple, the guards bore the shields, and afterwards they returned them to the guard room. As for the events of Rehoboam's reign and all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? There was continual warfare between Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and Rehoboam rested with his ancestors and was buried with them in the city of David. His mother name was Naomi. She was an Amorite, and Abijah, his son, succeeded him as king.
Okay, so that's the end of Rehoboam. He dies in the midst of civil war between the southern and the northern kingdoms. Again, just a terrible state of affairs. All right, chapter 15. Tommy, you want to read there?
Pass. No, I can pass.
Pat? Sarah, chapter 15?
In the 18th year of the reign of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, oh, for crying out loud, became king of Judah, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 years. His mother's name is whatever, daughter of whatever.
That name right there, that Abishalom, it is said that by some that is
Okay.
a relative of Absalom. Remember, who was the rebellious
Yeah.
son of David. So that could be coming down through that line. Okay, verse 3, read on.
I'll read from here. He
Okay.
committed all the sins that his father had done before him. His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord God, as the heart of David, his forefather, had been. Nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem by raising up a son to succeed him, and by making Jerusalem strong. For David had done what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and had not failed to keep any of the Lord's commands all the days of his life, except in the case of Uriah the Hittite.
Pause right there. That's kind of a parenthetical comment. David did right in the eyes of God, except for that little deal with Uriah and Bathsheba. But again, because he confessed that and God had forgiven him, it's minimized here. So what do we see in what Warren just read there? We see God's mercy coming forward, even though they're evil, they're doing the worst form of evil, it says. But for David's sake, the Lord God continued to give him a lamp in Jerusalem. In other words, kept his family alive in order to keep the line alive. Because why? Well, because of the covenant that he had made with David, his father. Okay, read on, Warren, verse 6.
There was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam throughout Abijah's lifetime. As the other events of Abijah's reign and all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the king of Judah? There was war between Abijah and Jeroboam. And Abijah rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. And Asa, his son, succeeded him as king.
Okay, verse 9. Terry, you want to pick up there?
In the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, Asa became king of Judah, and he reigned in Jerusalem 41 years. His grandmother's name was Maacah, daughter of Abishalom. Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father David had done.
Pause right there. Well, that's kind of interesting. Here comes a guy, he finally does right, and he reigns for 41 years. So let's read what he did, verse 12. Read on, Terry.
He expelled the male shrine prostitutes from the land and got rid of all the idols his fathers had made. He even disposed his grandmother Maacah's from her position as queen mother because she had made a repulsive Asherah pole. Asa cut the pole down and burned it in Kidron Valley. Although he did not move the high places, Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord all his life. He brought into the temple of the Lord the silver and gold and the articles that he and his father had dedicated. There was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, throughout their reigns.
Pause right there. We have that theme repeated, that the Civil War continues throughout that time, you know. America went through its period of civil war. Fortunately, we didn't have to live through that, but I mean, we've all read about how horrible that would be. And can you imagine how horrible it would be to have war going on in our country right now, that brothers are fighting brothers, parts of our country are fighting
We are.
another. Yeah, a Cold War, so to speak.
What we were talking about, just, that was able to keep the line for Jesus' birth alive.
Yeah.
That a few decided to do right.
That's right. That's right. Even though many in the line of Christ were called evil kings, God kept them alive just for His purposes. Yeah, that's right. Okay, let's see. Where did we leave off? 18? No, I'm sorry, 17. Read on, Terry.
Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and fortified Ramah to prevent anyone from leaving or entering the territory of Asa, king of Judah. Asa then took all the silver and gold that was left in the treasuries of the Lord's temple and of his own palace. He entrusted it to his officials and sent them to Ben-Hadad, son of Tabrimon, the son of Hezron, king of Aram, who was ruling in Damascus. Let there be a treaty between me and you, he said, as there was between my father and your father. See, I am sending you a gift of silver and gold. Now break your treaty with the Baasha, king of Israel, so he will withdraw from me. Then Hadad agreed with King Asa and sent the commanders of his forces against the town of Israel. He conquered Ajon, Dan, Abel, Beth, Maacah, and all Kinnereth, in addition to Naphtali. When Baasha heard this, he stopped building Ramah and withdrew to Tisra. Then King Asa issued an order to all Judah. No one was exempt, and they carried away from Ramah the stones and timber Baasha had been using there. With them, King Asa built up Geba and Benjamin and also Mizpah.
All right, pause right there a second. So what do we see going on here that, again, would have been an affront to God?
Making an alliance with Syria.
Exactly. The king of Judah now, he's in civil war with the northern kingdom. And so instead of turning to God and looking to God for protection and guidance, what does he do? He goes and he makes a covenant with a foreign nation.
And what does he take? The silver and gold that was left in the treasuries
Everything
of
was
the
left.
Lord.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, continue to go downhill. Kim, would you pick up in verse 23?
I'll pass.
Okay. Nancy?
23.
Yes.
Now the rest of all the acts of Asa, all his power, all that he did, and the cities that he built, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? But in his old age he was diseased in his feet. Then Asa slept with his ancestors and was buried with his ancestors in the city of his father David. His son Jehoshaphat succeeded him. Nadab, son of Jeroboam, began to reign over Israel in the 2nd year of King Asa of Judah. He reigned over Israel 2 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, walking in the way of his ancestor and in the sin that he caused Israel to commit. Baasha, son of Ahijah of the house of Issachar, conspired against him, and Baasha struck him down at Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines. for Nadab and all Israel were laying siege to Gibbethon. So Baasha killed Nadab in the 3rd year of King Asa of Judah and succeeded him.
All right, pause right there. Let's get some of these names straight. So over here we got Jeroboam, and his son was named Baasha, right?
Nadab.
I'm sorry, Nadab.
Nadab and Jeroboam.
Nadab. Okay, and then who's coming on the scene after him?
Baasha.
Yeah. Okay. So we're working in the north right now. All right, read on. Read 20, start 28 again.
20. So Baasha killed Nadab in the 3rd year of King Asa of Judah and succeeded him. As soon as he was king, he killed all the house of Jeroboam. He left to the house of Jeroboam not one that breathed, until he had destroyed it according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by his servant Ahijah the Shilonite, because of the sins of Jeroboam that he committed and that he caused Israel to commit, and because of the anger to which he provoked the Lord, the God of Israel. Now the rest of the acts of Nadab and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel?
All right, pause right there. So here we see that the prophecy that we read about this morning and last week, and that's in chapter 14, verse 11, and anyone belonging to Jeroboam who dies in the city, the dogs will eat, and he who dies in the field, the birds of the heavens will eat. The Lord has spoken it. So God declared years before that his family would be wiped out, and lo and behold, it happens exactly as God had said it would. Okay, read on.
There was war between Asa and King Baasha of Israel all their days. In the 3rd year of King Asa of Judah, Baasha, son of Ahijah, began to reign over all Israel at Tirzah. He reigned 24 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, walking in the way of Jeroboam and in the sin that he had caused Israel to commit.
Bad news. Chapter 16. Kenny, you want to read?
I'll pass.
Kenny?
Then the word of the Lord came to Jehu, son of Hananiah, against Baasha. I lifted you up from the dust and made you leader of my people Israel, but you walked in the ways of Jeroboam and caused my people Israel to sin and provoked me to anger by their sins. So I'm about to consume Baasha and his house, and I will make your house like that of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Dogs will eat those belonging to Baasha who die in the city, and the birds of the air will feed on those who die in the country. As for other events of Baasha's reign, what he did and his achievements, are they not written in the books of the annals of the kings of Israel? Baasha rested with his fathers and was buried in Tirzah, and Elah his son succeeded him as king.
So Elah is the new son, is the new king in his place.
Moreover, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Jehu, son of Hananiah. I lost place. To Baasha and his house, because of all the evil he had done in the eyes of the Lord, provoking him to anger by the things he did, and becoming like the house of Jeroboam, and also because he destroyed it. In the 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, Elah, son of Baasha, became king of Israel, and he reigned in Tirzah 2 years. Zimri, one of his officials who had commanded of half his chariots, plotted against him. Elah was in Tirzah at the time, getting drunk at the house of Arza, the man in charge of the palace at Tirzah, whatever it is. Zimri came in, struck him down, and killed him in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah. Then he succeeded him as king.
Things are moving rather quickly now, aren't they?
Yes, they're not lasting very long. This one's gonna make one
They
paragraph.
don't Democratic vote, do they? They just kill them.
Yeah.
This soon as he began to reign and was seated on the throne, he killed off Baasha's whole family. He did not spare a single male, whether relative or friend. So Zimri destroyed the whole family of Baasha in accordance with the word of the Lord spoken against Baasha through the prophet Jehu. Because of all his sins, they provoked the Lord God of Israel to anger by their worthless idols.
Pause right there. So again, we see a prophecy is made and a prophecy is fulfilled and his whole family is wiped out because of his sin. Read on.
As for the other events of Ella's reign and all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the king of Israel?
All right, pause right there. Juan, you want to pick up in verse 15?
Sure. In the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, Zimri reigned in Tirzah 7 days.
7 days.
The
Wow.
army was encamped near Gibbethon, a Philistine town. When the Israelites in the camp heard that Zimri had plotted against the king and murdered him, they proclaimed Omri, the commander of the army, king over Israel that very day there in the camp. Then Omri and all the Israelites with him withdrew from Gibbethon and laid siege to Tirzah. When Zimri saw that the city was taken, he went into the citadel of the royal palace and set the palace on fire around him. So he died because of the sins he had committed, doing evil in the eyes of the Lord and walking in the ways of Jeroboam and in the sin he had committed and had caused Israel to commit. As for the other events of Zimri's reign and the rebellion he carried out, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel?
So what do we learn about Zimri here?
Well, he usurped the command from Ella, and then killed all the family of Baasha. So he fulfilled that commandment, but he still continued in the ways of Jeroboam. So he did what he was supposed to do, and then he got
Yeah.
axed.
Yeah. Reigned 7 days. And
7 whole days.
7 whole days. And how did he die?
By fire.
Suicide. He burned himself to death. That's kind of stupid if you ask me.
I'd set it on fire and head out the back door.
He tried to take it with him.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
I have a little chart of the
Yeah.
kings and their families, and I'm adding how long they reigned, and it's not looking real good for the northern.
No, it's not. And I have made lists like that myself. That's why I bought this one right here. And it's good just, to compare it. It's kind of a good little,
Yeah.
reference point here. You can see, again, we got the northern tribes here. We got the southern tribes here. And we kind of see how they compare to each other, what was going on in each one of them. I don't think we have all of the kings in here. Yeah, we have Zimri in there. He's there, okay. And then we're also going to see how Elijah comes up around the time of Ahab, as we know. But
Yeah.
They didn't have to worry about outsiders, the family squabble was enough.
boy, isn't that right? Isn't that right? And again, even though you're going to be required to know this for the final exam, the most important thing for us to know about this is what? They were living in absolute turmoil and squalor and, again, fighting, death, murder as a consequence of what?
The sins.
Their sin, their failure to acknowledge God, their desire to do what? To have things their own way. They would rather do things their own way, move in accordance with their own plans rather than to follow the plan that God had for their lives. If the children of the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, all Israel, if they just would have realized, hey, if we will just do what God wants us to do, what God created us to do, our lives would be so much better. But many of them, they just never got it. They just never
If
got
there
it.
was anybody left would have remembered, they'd have said, let's go back to Egypt.
Yeah, isn't that right? Isn't that right? We had things so good over in Egypt, right? We were merely slaves back then. But again, the lesson that Israel should have learned is a lesson that we all should learn. If we're going through misery and turmoil and squalor in our own lives, if we would only realize that if we would only set our minds and hearts to live our lives in accordance with the plan that God has ordained for us, our lives would be much better. We would have peace.
You know, what I think about is, was there anybody, just a everyday person
Yeah.
that was asking God, you know, help me and be with me?
Yeah,
You know, we don't have a writing of them, that's all the leaders.
right. But I think there were. I think, you know, kind of reading between the lines, when we get to the story about Elijah, we're going to see that there were some God-fearing people around. It's just, I think what we're dwelling on right now, what we're seeing is the political structure, if you will, the leaders of the country. They're the ones who are going astray, and they're the ones who are causing the suffering and are suffering themselves.
Washington DC.
Yeah, yeah, right, that's right. Absolute squalor. Okay, where do we leave off on
21.
21? Jackie, you want to pick up there?
Then the people of Israel were split into two factions. Half supported Tibni, son of Ginath, for king, and the other half supported Omri. But Omri's followers proved stronger than those of Tibni, son of Ginath. So Tibni died, and Omri became king. In the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, Omri became king of Israel, and he reigned 12 years, 6 of them in Tirzah. He bought the hill of Samaria from Shemer for 2 talents and silver, and built a city of, I lost my place, on the hill calling Samaria of Shemer, the name of the former owner of the hill.
All right, pause right there. That's a significant verse right here. It kind of goes through quickly, but this tells us how the city of Samaria was formed, and Samaria became what?
The capital of Israel.
It became capital of northern Israel. So it was just a hill that was purchased by Omri.
For 2 talents of silver.
Yeah, not a whole bunch of money. It became a capital, and it became, you know, again, it sort of, this sort of took on the identity of the northern kingdom, you know, and even in Jesus' day, the Samaritans, they hearkened back to this hill.
So back in Jesus' day, so the Samaritans were half-breeds. So was Samaria, or after Shemer, was he half?
No, the business about the half-breeds and why they were such hated people really springs from the fact that in 722, the Assyrians came in, remember, and they killed a bunch of them. They transported a bunch of them, but a few of them were left there. But the ones that were left there, they intermarried with the Assyrians, the foreigners, and so they were half-breeds. They weren't considered to be pure Jews, and that's why they were hated by the quote-unquote pure Jews of Jesus' day.
And they weren't necessarily Assyrians that got brought there.
Yeah.
It was other people that the Assyrians had captured.
Exactly.
And they just kind of mixed them all together.
So it's hodgepodge.
So it is very much hodgepodge. And that's how they did it with all of the places that they captured. They just took everybody and kind of put them all together so nobody had a real home or
Or an identity.
could remember where they were from.
Yeah.
Kind of like Australia, huh?
Sort of, yeah.
Probably kind of like America.
Kind of like America.
The
melting pot.
Yeah.
But again, the significant thing about that is that the Jews of Jesus' day considered them to be unclean, right? Because they were not pure Jews.
Right.
So this is kind of their uncleanness came about as a result of what?
Their intermarriage.
That's right, their intermarriage and really the sins that they're committing here. Because if it weren't for these sins, you know, God would have kept his banner of protection over them. They never would have been conquered and destroyed and forced to intermarry with these with the foreigners. All right, read on.
Let's see.
Verse 25.
Okay. But Omri did evil in the eyes of the Lord and sinned more than all those before him. He walked in all the ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and in his sin. which he had caused Israel to commit, so that they provoked the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger by their worthless idols. As for the other events of Omri's reign, what he did and the things he achieved, are they not written in the annals of the kings of Israel? Omri rested with the fathers and was buried in Samaria, and Ahab, his son, succeeded him as king.
Okay, here we are, now to Ahab.
Nobody, apparently nobody was reading where it was written down. Nobody was reading those.
Right, right. Yeah, if they just take a little bit of time and read the newspapers about what's going on,
It was fake
the annals
news.
of the kings, yeah, it wasn't fake news at the time. They were telling the truth, the bitter truth. So here we are at the life of Ahab. Let me read a little bit. Verse 29. Now Ahab, the son of Omri, became king over Israel in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. Boy, that's a mouthful.
They just keep getting worse and worse.
They get worse and worse.
Exactly.
Because Omri was worse than the others before him.
Yeah. They keep spiraling downward. It's like they're in a competition to see who can reach the bottom first. Verse 31, and it came about as though it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and he married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went to serve Baal and worship him. Okay, so this Jezebel is the daughter of Ethbaal, who I think was a priest of Baal. I think that's where that name comes from. He was the king of the Sidonians. And so Ahab was purely devoted to the worship of Baal, just like his wife Jezebel was. So he, Ahab, erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab also made the Asherah. Thus Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel than all the kings of Israel who were before him. Wow.
Grief.
Wow. In his day, Hiel, the Bethelite, built Jericho. Actually, it should have been he rebuilt Jericho. Because,
Mine says rebuilt.
yeah. He rebuilt Jericho. He laid its foundation with the loss of Abiram, his firstborn, and set up his gates with the loss of his youngest son, Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun. Now, anybody remember what that prophecy was? I've got a reference there to Joshua 6:26, but everybody remembers the story about how Joshua defeated Jericho. And there was a curse pronounced. Do you have that? Juan, you want to read for us? It was a curse against anybody who would ever try to rebuild Jericho. Jericho, a very ancient city. You have that?
Uh-huh.
All right, read for us.
At that time, Joshua pronounced his solemn oath, "Cursed be before the Lord is the man who undertakes to rebuild this city, Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son, he will lay its foundations. At the cost of his youngest, he will set up its gates." So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land.
So God's plan was that once Jericho was destroyed, that it not be built. Anybody who would try to rebuild, anybody who tried to rebuild it, they would suffer the curse. And sure enough, in the time of Ahab, this guy Hiel decided he was going to do that. Just as he did, what happened? The word of the Lord came true. Okay.
It says in footnote, Ahab's evil wife Jezebel came from the Phoenician city of Tyre, where her father had been a high priest and
Yeah.
eventually king,
Yeah.
just like you see.
Yeah. Royalty.
Yep.
Not of the best order, though, we would say. Okay.
Watch
check.
out for them women.
And you keep all these people alive. My memory's passing.
Okay, now we get a little bit of good news. A little forward ahead. We're actually a little bit ahead of schedule here, so let's make some hay while the sun's shining. A little bit of good news. Now, here's where Elijah comes onto the scene. And just so we get to the chronology straight, where Ahab ruled approximately 874 to 853 BC. Okay? So Elijah comes on the scene at this point in time. Elijah, as we all know, was a major prophet, right? He spoke for God, he did God's will. And I was trying to think this morning, we know that, who comes after Elijah?
Elisha.
Elisha, of course. And then there's some other prophets who come along. Jonah's a minor prophet. Amos comes along, Hosea, but then Isaiah comes along around the time of Uzziah, King Uzziah's death. But who is the prior major prophet in the life of Israel before Elijah came on the scene?
Samuel.
Samuel, that's what I was thinking. He was probably the most profound, let me say, prophet. There were many others who would come along and speak certain words, but Samuel certainly was. And then before him, who preceded him as the mouthpiece? Would you say?
Nathan was before Samuel.
No, Nathan.
Nathan was after.
He came after. Remember, Nathan was at the time of David,
Okay.
and he certainly spoke some words. He wasn't as predominant a prophet, let's say, as some others were. But who would you say was before Samuel? We have to go all the way back to Moses, you think?
Mm-hmm.
Probably so.
Moses
Yeah.
and maybe Joshua.
Yeah, Joshua, I think of him more as a military leader. He
Yeah.
certainly did speak for God, but I would say the most prominent prophet before them. So, when you think about the major prophets, they were really special characters. Moses, certainly. Samuel, certainly. And now Elijah comes on the scene, and he's going to do some amazing things here as we're going to see. All right, Lon, you want to start reading about Elijah, chapter 17.
Now Elijah, the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead, said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew or rain in the next few years, except at my word." Then the words of the Lord came to Elijah, "Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there." So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan, and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land.
All right, pause right there just a second. This is a very interesting thing, how we're introduced to this prophet Elijah. Okay? So the first thing we know is that Elijah, he confronts Ahab. And what does he say? He says, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, surely there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word." So, what do you think Ahab's thinking at this point in time?
What a nut.
Yeah, who do you think you are? I'm the king. Who are you? You're nobody.
And the reason this is so important is because I have a footnote down here that says that those who worship Baal believed he was the God that brought about the rains and bountiful harvests.
Exactly.
So when Elijah walked in there and told the Baal worshiping king that there would be no rain for several years, Ahab was shocked. He had built a strong military defense, but it would be no help against drought.
Yeah. That's a very important thing that Wanda just read to us. You think, why would the children of Israel, why would anybody worship the Baals when they had seen and they had heard the stories about how powerful Jehovah God was and is, right? Well, they believed that the Baals controlled nature, all right? In other words, the Baals controlled their wealth in particular, because the Baals controlled the rain that came and watered their crops. And the Baals also, Baal was also the god of fertility. They had all these fertility rites and they had the cult prostitutes there. So they celebrated fertility. The idea was that if you worship the Baals, then your cattle and all of your flocks, they would multiply because that's how the blessing, if you will, of the Baals was bestowed. So yeah, when Ahab steps up and he pronounces it's not going to rain, it's like, okay, well, he's speaking against the Baals because they're the ones who they're the ones who supposedly controlled all of nature. But it's interesting. Evidently, God had told Elijah to go confront Ahab, speak to him this truth, and then do what?
Go to the Kerith ravine.
Yeah, basically go into hiding.
You gotta get lost.
Yeah, get lost. And so he says to him, basically, leave everything behind. All right. go and live in a cave, live by a brook. And so he's thinking, well, how am I going to eat? God says, all right, I've got some ravens that are going to bring you some food. And guess what? The ravens brought him food. You know?
I think it's interesting that Elijah comes onto the scene like that from out of nowhere,
Uh-huh.
or from, by our reckoning, because that's the first time we've heard of him.
Yeah. And so what does that coincide with? Elijah's appearance on the scene coincides with what? A new record being set in Israel. What?
Of how bad they
Yeah,
are.
that's right. They're plunging the depths of morality. I mean, they're just at the very bottom. And when they've gotten as bad as they can get, then God brings his prophet Elijah to speak a word to them. And so it's interesting. God says, go speak, which he did, and then he says, retreat, withdraw. He says, I'm gonna feed you there. And so the ravens fed him, and he drank from the brook. And then after a while, what happened?
The brook dried up.
Now, who caused the brook to dry up?
God did.
You think Elijah was happy when the brook dried up? No. But what was the message that God was sending to Elijah by drying up the brook?
It's time to move.
Exactly. Time to go somewhere else. I've got other plans for you.
But also, I thought it was interesting that he provided the bread and the ravens and the meat, just like in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And he also, in the wilderness, provided the water.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So obviously God was using Elijah in a very powerful way. But also, what was God teaching Elijah the man at that point in time?
To depend on me.
Yeah, dependence, total dependence upon him. To depend on him, but also to listen to him. And it's very interesting the way God moved Elijah around. He moved him around in a way that would have caused some anxiety at minimum to Elijah. Now, I think we're going to stop right here, but one of the things I want us to reflect on is whether God continues to work in our lives the way he worked in Elijah's life. And should we come to the level of dependence upon God the way Elijah did?
well, it's running right alongside of our experience in God. Because God was speaking, God was working,
Yep,
and then it caused a crisis of belief.
yep,
Well, like I said in that book, it said he's constantly molding us.
yep.
If we allow him to
That's exactly right.
let us become what he wants us to be used. So.
So he will be glorified, not us.
And Jackie said earlier, get the junk out of our lives, and that lady said, put all our thoughts and energy, everything on the Lord first.
Yeah. How many times in your life, has a brook dried up? Yep. And when the brook dries up, typically we don't like it, right? You think, God, why's my brook drying up? You know, I didn't really want this to happen.
Back to that experience with God, it says when God moves in us, there's going to be a crisis.
That's right.
It's going to require faith and action on our part.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes the devil is trying to get you
Oh,
away
that's
from
what's
God because he
confusing.
don't work.
Yeah.
in-
That's what's confusing.
But
Who's
then,
that
it's
voice?
like in Job, he allows it to happen to test your faith and
Yeah.
your reserve and your confidence, dependence on God.
Yeah.
That's
But
what
it's
I
still hard to go through that.
say that in that
Yes.
experience with God, it said that when they talk about Moses and all that, he said that they knew it was God speaking to them.
Yeah.
They knew what God was saying, and they knew exactly what they wanted God to do.
Exactly. That's right.
And so that's what I'm curious as we go, because the devil's talking to you too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So how do you discern as God? I guess through scripture
Yeah.
and prayers and stuff.
That's right. Well,
The devil's always trying to thwart God.
Yeah.
and that's the thing we're always trying to learn because like in Elijah's life, we see here, God proved to Elijah that God was dependable. He was trustworthy. He could be depended upon. Why? Because God used the ravens to bring him what he needed. He used the brook to bring him what he needed. And so Elijah learned that lesson. And then all of a sudden what happens? The brook dries up. And what's the immediate thing that comes into his mind?
Maybe God's after me.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Well, the question comes, the crisis of belief. Can I continue to depend upon God? Or is this the point where I stop depending on God and start depending on myself? And see, that's the temptation, you know? And the reason why God dried up the brook is not because God was not dependable, not that he was trying to hurt Elijah, not that he was trying to kill him, but what?
To move him.
Right. He had someplace else that he wanted Elijah to be. Now, Elijah's probably really comfortable. He probably had his cable set up in his cave, you know, and he probably got a new set of sheets for his rock.
Yeah,
And so he's thinking, I don't want to move at this point in time. God says, guess what? It's time to move. All right? And, well, yeah, exactly. And that's the way we are too. Sometimes we get just awfully comfortable where we are, even when God says it's time to move. And that's what we need to learn. We need to learn when God says it's time to move. It's time to move. We need to go.
And the key is to really recognize it.
That's it. All right.
He used the raven, which is
It's
a
easy though.
Yeah,
very intelligent bird.
that's right.
It's hard to just get up and go.
Yeah, and we learn a lesson from those ravens too. You know, God can use anything to fulfill the needs that we have in our lives. You know, God may be using us as ravens, right? There's a couple of ravens sitting right over there who deliver things in some plastic cartons to people who need it. So, you know, God uses all of us in different ways and there's another raven sitting right there. You see that? God uses all of us in different ways to accomplish His purposes. And it is really a magnificent thing to sit back and realize that God will use us and does use us to accomplish His purposes. All we have to do is what?
Trust Him.
Trust Him, be willing, and be available. What a
And be
great thing it is.
obedient.
And be obedient, that's right.